What's up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. This is Sam here. Just wanted to um, do another installment. So I'm pretty excited for today's topic. The topic is, uh, well, lots of my topics are going to be on this addressing atheistic arguments, but this one's kind of more a response. Um, and I thought it was important to do. So I'll explain why. Um, Yeah, so I ended up watching a fair amount of atheist content yesterday. Just kind of like I didn't like go out looking for atheist content. I don't really do that. Some apologists like listening to atheist content and really understanding their arguments and moving from there. And I do that sometimes. But sometimes it's challenging, right? Some of the arguments are challenging, uh, and I think that we should take them seriously. And I think that Christians are doing themselves a disservice when we don't when we kind of just like cast aside atheists' position and arguments, and don't take them seriously. So I do think that's important, but at the same time, I also think um, that sometimes like atheists, many of them are fighting tooth and nail, and they're like doing whatever they can to address our position, address Christianity, and disprove it. And Christians need to, and they're doing strategies. They're vocal. They're open about it. And Christians kind of need to not not like attack them in the same way that they attack us sometimes. But we do need to maybe like learn from them a little, in in how we stand up for the faith, and because they're standing up for lack of faith, right? They're fighting against the faith because they disagree with it, and um, a lot of it is because they see hypocrisy in the church. Some of that hypocrisy is there. So that's actually what I was going to start talking about was. So, anyways, Christians need to maybe take a page out of their book, and so that's why I'm doing this video. It's in response to an atheistic podcast, or I don't know if it's atheist or agnostic. Um, me and my friend always joke we have yet to meet a real atheist, right? Because ultimately, atheism. I think atheists would argue that they are agnostic, but you can still be like atheist and not really know that there is or isn't a God 100% for sure. So that's understandable, right? But yeah, me and my friend joke we've yet to meet a real atheist, somebody who is like 110% sure there is no God. It's been proven once and for all, you know. And so one of these atheists' arguments that was pretty good, I thought. Well, it wasn't even really an argument, but just something he said was like that he doesn't really go around every day thinking about God, um, until like he's confronted with a theist who is challenging him. So that's kind of interesting, and that's telling, that people generally aren't just going around, thinking about God all the time, like pondering these questions all the time. Now, me as and a lot of Christians aren't either, right? A lot of Christians aren't going around thinking about atheism all the time or thinking about why they don't believe, and so we the first thing we have to do as Christians is like look at it on a worldview level. Like just recognize initially that there are two different. We're like if I'm standing next to an atheist, we're seeing everything through two different lenses, right? Um, so, anyways, that was an interesting thing he said, but I also want to move forward and just say why I started watching this content. It was because they had done a podcast on somebody who I believe to be a false teacher, Stephen Furtick. I don't think it's unbiblical to call out false. false teachers and false prophets by name either. So this guy Stephen Furtick, he is the leader of Elevation Church. He you know, is very rich. He's started this mega church. I don't know where it is, but they do a ton of popular music, a lot of music that I really, I think they've done some songs that I like, but a lot of it that I don't like because it's just really empty and not. I do like music that brings me closer to God, rather than music that just kind of mindlessly chant slogans. So Stephen Furtick is famous for. So I'm actually in a point of agreement with these atheists, starting out and talking about a false teacher, somebody who kind of manipulates the people in his congregation. He sets himself above everybody else and says that he's like the visionary, the leader. He forces everybody to conform to his pattern of thinking. It's a cult of personality type of church, and he kind of just like repeats these slogans, like, oh, man, I can't even. Maybe I'll let me just find a clip here. I'll play a clip so you can understand what I mean about this guy. So starting out with an point of agreement. Okay, here's the clip. Oh, I got that pretty fast.
No, you never did this before, but you did that. You did that. Put it in the chat. I did that. I did that. I did that. I held on to God when I had no job. I held on to God when I had. This is for somebody. This is for somebody who's up under a threat of intimidation right now for something that for. But you did that. No, you never did this before, but you did that.
So you can see him.
You did that. Put it in the chat. I did that. I did that. I did that. I held on to God when I had no job. I held on to God when I had. This is for somebody. This is for somebody who's up under a threat of intimidation right now for something that you've never traveled this way before. But you did that. No, you never did this before.
Okay, you get the idea, right? So he's super charismatic, super enthusiastic, like just like he said you did that, like, I don't know, probably like 50 times in that 20-second clip, which is impressive. I don't know, maybe like made time stop and actually was able to like make time stop and say you did that more times than time itself would actually allow, which is pretty impressive. But like just mindlessly like repeating something and yelling it really loud, and when he yells it, like the people in his church cheer. They really revere him as a prophet, as a as a sound teacher, and he and so like I think that video too was telling as well, when he looks at the camera and he says this is for somebody right now, as if like he's prophesying to somebody out there in the stratosphere, somebody who's watching, like, oh, you did that, okay, yeah, I did that, but I don't know what that is, so what are you talking about, right? um so yeah, like I know that I have Christian friends who would probably disagree with me about that guy, who think he's awesome, but like he runs this mega church. He won't disclose them, and this is what that atheist podcast was talking about. So I watched a Christian podcast on Stephen Furtick and his false prophecies, and they really dove deep into the theology that he teaches, that is actually unchristian. It goes against the gospel. It's a different gospel. So he and he kind of started out more normal, and then he kind of became that way, more like chanting mindless slogans and repeating himself. So yeah, we start out in a point of agreement about that guy. I can't remember what else I was gonna say about him, but Christians listening to people like that should have red flags going off. I mean, like I said, when he was pointing at the camera, like saying you did that, that was just classic like televangelist behavior of people who like have been peddling the word of God for profit. Um, and I think, yeah, some pastors, like, whose job it is to, like, shepherd a church, uh, and, like, have to make ends meet, right? Um, but I feel convicted about, like, taking money, like, selling the gospel for money, right? Um, and so that's what some people are doing out there, and this is leads to a broader point about what might ties into this discussion right now. Um, there are a ton of people like that. There are a ton of churches like that. Uh, I would say maybe half of American Christianity is that type of vague, fluffy unicorn, like, that's what I always say, fluffy unicorn Christianity that is all about me, and what I can do, what God can do for me, how He's gonna make me rich, how He's gonna make me famous, and how He's gonna make my life easier and better, and how great I am because I'm a Christian, and that. And so really what it ends up being is like just New Ageism, repackaged into like a Christianity type thing. So and a lot of it ends up being just Gnosticism, um, repackaged into Christianity. And so what I think is like that that type of Christianity is showing through to the world more than we know as Christians, and that is becoming one of the main places where people can rightly point their fingers and say, aha, and say Christianity is this. Like, look at what Christianity is. When in reality, when we look at what Christianity is, when we look at the truth of Jesus and we look at the reasons for the faith, it is not that. And so I think Christians, just as much as we talk about atheism and we talk about, we defend the faith, we ought to be calling out false teachers, we ought to be calling out false prophets, and saying, like, hey, no, these are not, these people are not real Christians. Um, and if they are, they're way off base from what Christianity is all about. So who knows? Maybe Stephen Furtick is a real Christian, but based on his motivations, his goals, I have my doubts about the guy, right? So that's where it started, and then I like was scrolling through their content, on this podcast and just trying to see, like, looking for, okay, where's the place where they're going to address the strongest Christian arguments, because that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see these people who were firm in their atheism address Christian arguments specifically. Um, and so I scrolled down and there was some about, like, Christians being anti-LGBTQ. There were some about Christians being pro-life. There were some about, so these guys are pro-choice, right? And so we go down, and so they have all these very, and then there's some more people that they're addressing and refuting, and then there was one on apologetics. So that's the one that I watched, um, and it's about a 45 minute. It was a 45 minute podcast, and so they were, first of all, like, you could tell that they kind of didn't really know what apologetics were. That apologetics, they kind of thought that apologetics was like a new phenomenon, um, in the church, that, oh, all of a sudden, like, they made it sound like all of a sudden Christians, like, realize that their worldview is falling apart, and so they create this, like, pseudo pseudoscientific enterprise called apologetics, and they're just making a ton of money off of that. So I'm an apologist, right? And I do it not for money. I do it because I just thought about that this morning. But, like, imagine if somebody, like, you watch somebody in the middle of the night pull up to your house, hop out of their truck with a can of gasoline, start pouring gasoline around your house, and then pull out a box of matches, and then light a match. Like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna go and you're gonna defend your house, right? And that's kind of like, as Christians, we need to start looking at things in that way, because people are, Christianity's under scrutiny all the time. It's not just a new thing, it's been for the last 2,000 years. And so as Christians, we do have a lot of work to do. We have to think about, um, think about Christianity. I'm not saying everybody has to be an apologist, but so anyways, these guys start out kind of talking about what apologetics are. Where does it come from? Oh, it comes from the Greek, right? Well, it does come from the Bible, actually. I think it's in First or Second Peter, and that we have to be ready to give an apologia for the reason for the hope we have. And then one thing that they said was that faith is belief in things that there are no evidence for, which I disagreed with. Because when I think about, and maybe they can make a case for that, right? But when I think about faith, I think about faith as being belief in things we cannot see but we know are there, and that's the biblical definition in the book of Hebrews that talks about what faith actually is. And I also argue in my book, The Best Guess, that faith is actually something that every single person uses day to day. We all have faith on one level or another about something. Like if you're going to go, if you have a flight tonight you're flying to a different state, you're putting faith in your pilot to get you there on time, right? And get you there alive, right? And not end up crashing the plane. So like, and if you're an atheist, you have faith that your atheism is true, right? You have faith that that there is no God, and that there, so at which there is, I guess you could make the argument equally that that kind of faith is lacking evidence as well, right? So if Christianity is lacking evidence, the lack, the alternative is also lacking evidence. So I disagree with their definition of faith and with their idea that apologetics is like some new phenomenon that, all of a sudden Christians are like coming up with arguments. And I mean, we have been for a long time. In the book, this book called The Return of the God Hypothesis by Dr. Stephen Meyer, he discusses how the church and how Christianity actually led to major advances in in the world of science. Throughout the early centuries, you had people like Saint Augustine, but then later people like Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, and Boyle, who had really, they had a strong faith, and based on their worldview of theism, were able to really propel science forward. And then naturalism kind of came after that, and the looking at science as through the lens of like everything arose naturally without God, and trying to explain how things happened without God. And so which gets into a whole nother topic of intelligent design, and where everything came from, which we're already 18 minutes into this video, so I'm not gonna have time to get into all that. Excuse me. So anyways, the discussion on faith and apologetics was where they were going, and so they were addressing some of the apologetic arguments, and their audience was obviously atheist anyways, so I think that they didn't really need to address the arguments as they were stated. So some of these arguments for apologetics, like the Coulomb argument, which is a cosmological argument for the existence of God, atheists like scoff at it and they make fun of it, right? Because it's pretty simple. It's like got two premises and then a conclusion based on those premises. And a lot of our arguments kind of are like that, but that's the way argumentation works. And as long as those premises are, still, and the conclusions from those premises are not refuted, then those arguments still stand up to scrutiny, right? So it doesn't really matter if you laugh and make fun of our arguments, which was what they ended up doing in this podcast a lot. They would kind of do a cookie cutter framework of our arguments and what the Christians use as apologetics, and they would just kind of present their version of it to make it look really stupid and foolish, and then kind of laugh at it and make fun of it. And they would say like, wait, like the Coulomb argument, wait, how is that? That doesn't even make sense. That's stupid, right? And so, anyways, I don't remember all the arguments off the top of my head that they were talking about, but they were, you know, the point is this video is meant to be a larger, broader response to sometimes the way that atheists address Christians in their arguments, and maybe it'll help. You know, maybe it'll help atheists like this video. Who knows? Because it'll help them maybe take a different approach. Um, and that kind of reminds me of like just thinking about the pro-life thing, which I'm planning on doing a video soon about abortion and pro-life versus pro-choice, whether we can be pro-choice in the church, and so, but anyways, they have a whole podcast on pro-life versus pro-choice. Obviously, they're going to be on the position of pro-choice because they're taking the alternative position of against Christianity's on everything else. So why not that as well? But like the pro-life argument is very good. I mean, I've gotten into so many arguments against pro-choicers, and I can't think of one that I've lost. And I'm not saying that because I'm really smart. I'm just saying that because the pro-choice argument is absurd. It rests on subjective feelings. It rests on just it's grasping at straws, and there's not really any substance to it. And I've seen really intelligent people argue for pro-choice, and then what they end up doing usually is they end up drawing some sort of philosophical analogy, and they'd start saying like they just draw this elaborate analogy, and because they're really smart, they can really kind of like put this mimic this analogy to what an abortion is. But like when you really think about it, it's like, no, that doesn't work. They're two different things. One is killing a baby before it's born, and the other one is what you just said. It doesn't work. They don't fit. We have to address abortion for what it is, as what it is, and determine whether or not the baby inside the mother is actually a life, which it is scientifically, biologically a life. So anyways, that was a side note. So yeah, maybe I can find these people to kind of see what they're talking about here, and play a clip for you. Yeah, so they have a very, they kind of, all right, I'm not going to be able to do that. So they go through like 6 or 7 arguments for Christianity, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of arguments for Christianity. They address a couple mainstream apologists like William Lane Craig and Dinesh D'Souza, and they call right off the bat they call William Lane Craig a d-bag, right? So, obviously they already don't like the guy, but if you watch some of William Lane Craig's like 2-hour debates, I would say like instead of listening to an atheist commentary on like an apologist, so they kind of say like, oh yeah, like William Lane Craig, guys think he's smart, Christians think he's really smart, and so they like revere him and they honor him, and so they're just making fun of us, making fun of Christianity, making fun of who we are, and then they look at William Lane Craig, and they basically, the only thing they say about him is the Kulam argument. They're like he has the Kulam argument, and that's not the only argument that William Lane Craig has. I mean, he is a deep thinker and a philosopher, right? And he is a Christian philosopher, so obviously they think he's wrong. But if you watch his debates against people like Christopher Hitchens, he dominates those debates. He wins, and most of the ones that I've seen, like, maybe that's just through my bias, but he is more prepared. He has better arguments. He states what his thesis is, and he argues for his thesis, whereas Christopher Hitchens oftentimes, and the other atheists that he argues against oftentimes just kind of like attack, vaguely attack Christianity, using the same kind of notions that these guys were using. Well, Christianity does this, and why would God do this if this happened, and etc. And instead of like really concretely making a case for atheism. And so Dinesh D'Souza also has a debate against against Christopher Hitchens, and he also dominates Christopher Hitchens. And I'm not saying Christopher Hitchens isn't a smart guy. He is very intelligent, but yeah. So instead of like looking at these atheists cookie cutter representations of our arguments, because I've seen like when I'm in a debate with an atheist or discussion, because I don't usually like have structured debates, but like I'm trying to understand what their argument is. So sometimes like I don't want to misrepresent them, and I want to address their argument as it stands. And so sometimes like when I hear what they're saying, I'm gonna say like try to restate it back to them, say, hey, am I misrepresenting you? Misrepresenting your argument? But it seems like what they did in this video was like they took the argument and then they represented it, right? But at times they were representing it in a way that they were going to make fun of it. And so they would say like, with the Kulam argument, everything that exists must have a cause, and then they're like, wait, what? That's stupid. Well, there's hundreds of pages written on cosmological argument. Dr. Stephen Meyer has 500-page book on the matter. There is, there's lots of work that's been written on it. So anyways, like just to say like that's the all we have as Christians, and we're just clinging to this super weak argument. Well, like our faith, we don't put our faith in the Kulam argument, which actually wasn't created by William Lane Craig. It was created by Muslims, I think. So anyways, it's not like that's what we put our faith in, is like this argument, but those things are like, and like the moral argument. Oh, that was one that they addressed. So they addressed the moral argument, and then that was one that they really did mischaracterize and misrepresent, because the moral argument is a solid argument. So they said, we have morals, therefore God exists. And so that was like their representation of the argument. But what the moral argument is, if I was gonna simplistically narrow it down, it would say, okay, it's wrong. We know we have a conscience. We know it's right and wrong to do things. We have morals, right? So, but are they objective or subjective? Like that's the key to the question. And when you really think about it, if they're subjective, then, and if they just kind of evolved alongside humanity, then we either have to place our moral oughts on our own arbitrary opinions. So like if you say it's right, it's right, or it's not right to kill, and I say it is right to kill, no, neither of our moral ought is more or less right than the other, because there is no overarching standard that we're adhering to. So then you would say, okay, well then we appeal to the larger human consensus. So we appeal to to the majority of people. How have morals evolved, and what do we think is right in this society? But then that falls into the same problem of it's just a bunch of people subjectively interpreting morality together and ultimately coming to those conclusions. And oftentimes, one person can be more right than many people. And if you look at the idea of slavery, and the abolition of slavery, slavery was more popular among the community. and the people who opposed it were rejected. They were hated. But were they right? We all know that they were right. So at that time, morality was, or slavery was, all around the world. But we still know that the people who disagreed with it were right, especially looking back, because hindsight's 2020, right? And so similarly today, the pro life um, position is more unpopular than the pro choice position in our country. But does that make the pro choice position right? And that's arguable, right? And then I don't think it's arguable, but it's a big debate right now. So we're still in the middle of that. And then the Nazis, right? Like you had in Nazi Germany, it was sanctioned by the state to kill Jews. It was sanctioned by the state to lock people up in concentration camps, to kill the disabled people, because that was where their religion and worldview had led them, their pantheistic, atheistic religion, because some of them were pantheists, some of them were atheists, and in Soviet Russia the same thing. But then after in the Nuremberg trials, the Nazis who were on trial, they claimed that they didn't actually do anything wrong because they were actually following the higher laws of their states. So there you see how the moral argument really stands up strong. Like if there is no overarching objective morality, if it's just all arbitrary and subjective based on whatever people want, it doesn't work. It escapes the way that morality is designed, and that does show that morality is designed, and it is objective outside of us, and so that objective standard in so my argument is not just like morals exist, therefore God exists. It's not that simple, but it is recognizing like, hey, if you're pulling out objective morality from the argument, you can't make sense of why we operate under a moral code as human beings. Like you can't make sense of that just based on our arbitrary opinions. Therefore, there is an objective morality. And if there is an objective morality, morality exists outside of us. And that doesn't make sense for morality like existing out there in the ether without like something higher than us, without a higher standard. And so that higher standard indicates like that just kind of, in my mind, leads to the conclusion that there is a God, right? And that there is a transcendent designer for the morality. So anyways, in my book, The Best Guess, I discussed the argument of morality for like 60 pages. So it's not just I didn't just say chapter 19 morality. Morals exist, therefore God exists. And then I didn't do a bunch of mental gymnastics. I mean, this is a serious problem for atheism. The conscience, the appeal to morality, the recognition that there is a morality. It's a problem for atheism, and making fun of it, dismissing it, doesn't make it go away. So anyways, this video is running a little long. I just wanted to kind of address the way that oftentimes atheists look at Christians' arguments in a cookie cutter kind of way, make fun of them, present a very brief. They have to make the Christian's argument super duper brief and stupid sounding, so that they can make their argument brief, and then sneer at our argument. That's what they did in this video. I'm not saying all atheists do this, but and then sneer at our argument to make fun of it. Yeah. So and then the last thing that I wanted to talk about was they said, oh yeah, they addressed. I'm going to talk about two more things. They addressed fulfilled prophecy. So one of the strongest arguments for Christianity is like the fulfilled prophecy in Scripture that things were written in Scripture um, hundreds and hundreds of years before they came to happen. Um, some things are still happening that are being fulfilled from Scripture. So prophecy. Okay, so this is where they really get into big trouble. Um, addressing. So they basically say, well, that's like they're Christians are taking a book that's a fiction book. So the Old Testament was fiction, the New Testament is fiction. So they're saying, oh look, prophecy was fulfilled. Well, that's just how you write a fiction book. That's how you make good fiction, and that was their argument against the fulfilled prophecy argument, which was just stupid. I mean, no, like the the Old Testament and the biblical composition took place over thousands of years. So it wasn't just a work of fiction that somebody wrote. Um, it was, and that also commits the disingenuous authorship fallacy that I talked about in another video, where we think, like, if you think that the people who wrote the Bible were actually lying about what they wrote and didn't actually believe that there was a God, didn't believe that the things that they were relating were actually true, which there's no evidence to show that. All the evidence points to the things that they wrote were true. You have the apostles going to their deaths for what they believed, for believing in the resurrection. Um, there's no evidence that the Old Testament writers believed what they wrote wasn't true. Um, Secular scholars have looked at the Old Testament composition, the historical composition, and just praised how masterful it is, how historically accurate it is, and so there is just saying like, oh, the Bible's a work of fiction, therefore fulfilled prophecy, is not an actual argument. No, that's not true, and I would say just you would have to, in order to make that case, you would have to look at the arguments that we're making for fulfilled prophecy, like in Isaiah 53, which was written 700 years before Jesus, and there's archaeological proof of that. Uh, Isaiah 53 um, discussing specific things that Jesus fulfilled, right? Specific criteria for the Messiah that only Jesus could have fulfilled. There's Psalms that do the same thing, which were written even longer than before that. You have Moses uh, prophesying what was going to happen to Israel when they fell. You have prophecy fulfilled through Abraham. The whole Bible is fulfilled prophecy, and so to say it's just two works of fiction that that have been made up. So of course there's going to be fulfilled prophecy in there. It doesn't. There's so many problems with saying that when you start looking at when these books were written, when you start looking at what happened and the historical evidence for these stories. So just saying that um, does not discredit fulfilled the argument for fulfilled prophecy. And this video, I'm not going to get into all the details, all the because I could do a video on fulfilled prophecy and really start to think about more of those things. Um, but then the other thing is, so the last one I wanted to talk about that they addressed was, oh yeah, this kind of went hand in hand with their quarrel with the moral argument. Um, because then they just called God a big meanie, basically. Like God is a cruel master. He, all the look at all the things that he did in the Old Testament, the violence, the war, and then they'll usually bring up like a couple different things. They'll bring up misogyny. They said that God condoned rape, and then they said that he condoned slavery. And so what I always say, I don't just jump in and start arguing why God condones slavery or why God did this or that. Sometimes what I'll say is like, show me what you're talking about. Show me in the Bible where it says that. And sometimes they'll find it, right? And it is hard. And then if I don't have the answer for it, then I'll say like, hey, I'm gonna look into this and try to find an answer for it. So ultimately, like they discredit God's. This is the fallacy that they commit when they're arguing against God's moral character. They say, well, God can't exist. This is just a fiction book. This is, but then at the same time, they look at the Bible like, if it was true, then God's a meanie. So God's evil, right? So they kind of are able to create benefit for themselves uh, by like just slandering the Bible as a work of fiction, which doesn't make any sense because the people who wrote the Bible believed the things that they were writing were true. Christian, like they slander Christians as lying to everybody, but like I said in my other video, Christians believe that they know the Lord. Christians believe that the Bible is true. So to the best of our knowledge, we are not lying to people, unless we're just deceived, right? Uh, and then and then if those things fall apart, then they look at God as a liar. They look at God as a tyrant, and they point to specific instances in the Old Testament where God had Israel go to war, where God had Israel defend itself, and claim its nation nationhood, right? And to protect itself against external threats, um, and evil nations that wanted to destroy Israel. Um, so yeah, I'm not gonna go through the entire slavery argument or the entire whatever other arguments they do, but they usually like say, well, God did this, and so they dump a bunch of like criticisms on God's character, and so you're like, okay, man, like I can't, it would take an hour to discuss the slavery thing with you, so I can't sit here and discuss all the things you just addressed. Show me an example of what you're talking about, and let's go there and look directly at it and see what it's saying. Um, and let's address these things impartially. Um, let's look at them without assumptions, and really see whether what you're saying is true. And there are problems in the Old Testament, right? There are um, things that Christians have not been able to really argue for, like with slavery. We have to remember though that slavery was uh, was normalized globally, all around the world, um, and everybody owned slaves, everybody traded slaves, but the Bible does condemn man stealing, and makes it a crime worthy of capital punishment. So stealing people and selling them into slavery uh, was illegal under God's law, and so that that's just um, one thing that I wanted to add there. So this video is running really long, but anyways, uh, the other thing is, um, we have different connotations in America today of what slavery actually is versus what the Bible says it is. Uh, and the different words used. So when Paul says slaves obey your masters, um, I think it's pretty similar to because in that time there were there was slavery, but what God was saying, like I actually really, this is gonna sound super controversial, but I appreciate that verse like when I'm at work, because when I'm at work, I used to have the mindset of like, I'm above this, I'm better than this work. But what Paul is saying is like, no, like your boss, the owner of the company, he deserves your respect. You had a mutual agreement. And so slavery in the Bible, when you're looking at it, a lot of the time what it meant was servitude, and like Jacob basically becomes a slave of Laban, and works for him for 7 years, and then 7 more years in order to win Laban's daughter in marriage. And so it was an agreement. And so lots of times when there was a debt that was owed, people would work off that debt. And the Bible even said that slaves must go free after, I believe it was on the 7th year. So there was precedent for freeing slaves, and so they weren't slaves in the way that we think that they were, like people who were being treated cruelly. Um, they they were always they were more like servants, right? Like a house servant or something, or an employee um, who worked for somebody, than uh, than actual slaves who were being tortured. Um, and so basically what you have to remember about the Old Testament and the Mosaic Law was a law that was given to a people who were, um, you know, who had become deeply corrupted, and in a culture and an age that was deeply corrupted. So that the law that God gave um, wasn't meant to be the final law, because there were improvements on the covenant. Like the old covenant before Jesus, we live in the new covenant with Jesus, and the book of Hebrews talks about how now the covenant is perfect through Jesus, but before, things were just a shadow of what were to come. So if the Mosaic law was perfect, how was it how was it then that it became imperfect? If it was perfect, if what he gave the people at that time was perfect, um, then there would be no way to improve upon it, right? Which there was, and the Bible tells that was the case. So what it shows is not that God isn't perfect and that he messed up making the law, but that the law that he gave to the people at that time were meant to make them stand out among the other nations at the time, as being the people of God, of living in God's power, and so his moral code and his law was actually superior to the other nations at that time. So even though they still addressed things that were common, like slavery, and there was different treatment of women at that time, uh, it actually towered above, morally above, what the other nations were doing around it. So then, and the last thing is like about the Bible's treatment of women. Um, People say the Bible's misogynistic. What happened when Jesus was brought the prostitute? The Pharisees brought the prostitute to Jesus. They threw her at his feet, and they said, uh, they said, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The Mosaic law says we are to stone her, um, and Jesus looked at them and said, "Whoever's without sin, cast the first stone." Um, so Jesus saw the law through the lens of God's perfection. He saw the Mosaic law as something that was given to the people at the time because of their hardness of hearts, because of their immorality, because of their inability to live perfectly, right? Um, Even when he was brought up with the idea of adultery um, or divorce, when the Pharisees said, Moses said it was okay to divorce your wife, and Jesus said, well, Moses gave you that law because your hearts were hard. He gave you that law because you weren't able to understand the truth. So Jesus was able to see the spiritual reality behind some of these laws, behind some of these things, and so he was, and that's why he was the perfection of the law. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he discusses the deeper reality behind the spiritual reality behind things like adultery and murder, and what sin actually is. When he says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Well, is he actually instructing you to go and cut out your eye or cut off your hand? No, he's not. But he's addressing like the deeper spiritual reality of how serious of a condition sin is to people. And so yeah, this caricaturing is not going to stop. It's not going to go anywhere. This caricaturing of our arguments, this caricaturing of the Bible, of God, saying that fulfilled prophecy is just based on a work of fiction. It's it's just a foolish argument on its face. Um, and then saying like, making that caricature of the moral argument doesn't work as well, because saying that what we're saying as Christians is morals exist, therefore God exists. I mean, I guess you can kind of make that case, right? But ultimately, like, as if we have no actual substance to that argument. That argument, by the way, has not been refuted. So they state these arguments, like the cosmological argument, basically that showing that everything in time and space had a beginning, and a beginning shows that there, something caused that. So we look to an external cause, and what is most likely the external cause, and then we look at the possible options that it could be, and then we pick the best possible explanation out of those different causes, etc. Right? But they say all we're saying is everything that had a cause, or everything that exists has a cause, therefore God exists. That's not all we're saying. Like, please, like, you're not doing yourself any favors by just saying a one sentence reiteration of our argument and not actually understanding. Well, I'm sure they understand what our arguments are, but they're they're manipulating and trying to make us look foolish, um, and but in the end they make themselves look foolish, right? And so that's the thing that goes back to Aaron Raw and Mike Winger's exchange on the internet, on YouTube. Aaron Raw did a video refuting Bible's fulfilled prophecy, and then Mike Winger refuted Aaron Raw and showed that Aaron Raw's video was like 2 hours long, and so Mike Winger was like, it takes a lot longer to expel lies and to show why. Like, this video is already running longer than the video that I watched on atheism. So the atheists like shout all these accusations at Christians, and then Christians say, okay, let's look at those one at a time. All right, here's A, here's B, here's C, here's D, here's E. And by the time you get to, they've already made it all the way through Z. They've unloaded all their scorn and malice for the Christian, and we've made it to D or E, and it's taken us 3 hours to really discuss those things. So that's the difference, we get attacked, we address what they're trying to say, and then they say more, and it's just back and forth. And so and I guess that's really the gist of it. When you look at what Mike Winger did, he showed that Aaron Raw didn't do his homework. Aaron Raw was just making fun of Christians. Aaron Raw was saying all these different things. He was not, he was spreading lies, or maybe not lying. So he could have just not actually done his research, but but if he did know the answers to some of these things, and then like knowingly caricatured the Christian argument, saying, oh, Christians are saying this, that would be a lie, right? So anyways, there's this channel, and so this was like the best of like this whole podcast, right? I scrolled through a bunch of these episodes and trying to find the one that is going to address the strongest Christian arguments. And this is a podcast about why atheism is true. That they have hours and hours and hours of discussions on why atheism is true. And so I sort through all these discussions, and I find where they're going to be addressing the most prominent Christian arguments, and that's going to be in apologetics, right? That's going to be where Christians are actually providing a reasoned basis for their faith. Clicked on that, listened to it. They had no substantive counter arguments for the Christian arguments, and the name of that podcast was "Believe It or Not." So if you're familiar with that, then that's then maybe you can like go listen to some of them, and also see, and these guys, they seemed like nice people, right? They seemed like funny, and they had, I am in agreement with them about some of the people they talk about, who kind of make Christianity cartoonish in that way, and Stephen Furtick is one of those false teachers who makes Christianity look foolish to the world, because he's using Christianity as a tool for his own benefit. He's peddling the gospel, well, his version of the gospel for profit, and that's wrong, right? So anyways, yeah, that's just kind of, I just wanted to kind of give an overview of like some insight of what atheists use to really attack Christians, and I wanted to address specifically some atheist content that I listen to, that sometimes when you listen to it, it's like it challenges you, but when you really start thinking about the things that they're saying, uh, and you start looking at them more closely, they're not quite as intimidating as they might appear at first. So that gives us hope, and that gives us strength as Christians to, and we don't have to fear, because we know that we put our hope in God, right? We put our hope in the one who created us, the one who saved us, who redeemed us. And that's the other thing, that's just, this is almost so simple that it sounds stupid, but even Paul admitted, if Jesus didn't rise from the grave, then what I'm doing in all these videos, I'm doing in my writing, what we're doing as Christians and spreading the gospel, it's all so foolish. So if Jesus didn't rise from the grave, these guys are absolutely right. That our position is foolishness. So we gotta give the atheists some their due. If the resurrection isn't true, and we're all in our sins, then preaching the gospel is pointless. Um, and yeah, so if God doesn't exist, if Jesus isn't who he said he was, then all of our arguments fall apart, and we're defending nothing. We are lying, and we should be ashamed of ourselves for spreading lies to the world. But that's a topic. This is an hour long. That's a topic for a different discussion. So, anyways, I hope this the resurrection is a topic for a different discussion. But anyways, I hope this video blessed somebody out there. Just a reminder, my videos are always just me sharing my mind, and not me preparing for, because I don't want to think about my YouTube channel that much. So I just talk about things that interest me in the moment, and sometimes I think about those things 5 minutes before I come on to the video, and so I want these discussions to be organic. But let me know if there's anything that you want to add to what I say, or if there's one of those arguments that you want to really either state the position of atheism, or the counter argument to those atheist positions, or defending the Christian position. Leave it in the comment section. And as always, like and subscribe to my videos if you want to see more of this content. I do these videos most days, and I'm very grateful. God is good, so we can put our trust in him. So God bless you all. Goodbye.